I have decided at this point in my career to emulate Donald Trump. It's taken me a long time. You know, it's like I never thought that I would start imitating Donald Trump, but I finally came to the conclusion this morning. First, only this morning that I decided that. You know, apparently they've discovered that the only thing they can do with him is to get him on a teleprompter, right? Because when he goes off, when he doesn't have a teleprompter, he says outrageous things, right? Gets himself into huge trouble. So I started thinking about it. I thought, well, you know, I'm sort of the same way. I just can't stand to read my notes, right? So I love to wing it, and then I get pretty much lost. So anyway, I decided the way that I would be emulating him this morning would be that I'm going to stick a little bit to my notes, which I usually don't do. And I actually was just scribbling notes this morning about this little thing, and so I thought, well, wait, I really like that. Oh, I really like that. I started liking what I was writing, and then I realized I would never remember to say them. So this is called humility. Well, the closest I can come to humility. So Saturday, at the end of our Beginners 2 course, Caesar, who he was sitting here yesterday, so Caesar and I were talking, and so he said, he said, I've been thinking a lot about what you said a few weeks ago about, you said you were talking to one of your clients who was sort of having very punitive thoughts about themselves, kind of like very unkind thoughts about themselves. Some of you has anyone ever experienced having unkind thoughts about yourself? Well, I never have, right? Robert, have you ever had like a mean thought about yourself? You stupid. Well, I think it's amazing if you think about it. You know, I mean, isn't it kind of amazing? I mean, isn't it? I mean, John, isn't it? I mean, it's like the reason why I say it's amazing is we all do it. And yet, it never, I mean, why is it that we do it? So anyway, I had said this, maybe this was a Dharma talk, but see, it made an impression on Caesar. And so he said, you remember what you said? And I said, I don't remember. He said, you said to your client, do you think you can really afford that thought? And that really made an impression on him. I said, don't you think that is too expensive for you to pay for? So I thought about it, and I thought, it's really true. It never occurs to us how expensive our thoughts are. Expensive mean self-esteem, the way we feel about ourselves, the way we feel about others, whatever. Those thoughts are very expensive. And yet, how do you think about a thought? They don't cost anything, right? They're not worth a dime. They come and they go, they come and they go, they come and they go. They're just like these little events that we don't really even pay that much attention to. And unless they really happen to be really angry or punitive or whatever, then we pay attention to it. But other than that, they just come and go and they come and go. So I think maybe one of my favorite teachers on earth is Krishnamurti, because he focused on thought, perhaps more than almost anybody that I can think of. I can go to the Buddha, who in many ways, he's the guy who came up with the term right thought, right? So he's the guy who talked about wholesome thoughts and unwholesome thoughts, and really putting them even into a little basket. You got a little basket of, you put them in wholesome thoughts and unwholesome thoughts. So obviously it isn't as if the Buddha and Buddhism doesn't work with thought, right thought, and unskillful thought. But I think that Krishnamurti, to me, he actually talked about it in a way that I most have always related to. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Krishnamurti and thought. And I even literally turned to a page, and we'll just see if I get to reading it. Since it's been this morning since I read it, so it's not going to apply to what we're talking about now, probably. So here I am. I'm going to come back to my notes just a little bit. So when we were in Temecula a few years ago, 10 years ago, I gave a Dharma talk, and so I gave everybody a little riddle, or puzzle, I guess. It's not a riddle, a puzzle. And the puzzle was, what weighs as much as an elephant, but lighter than a feather? What weighs as much or more than an elephant, but is lighter than a feather?
Thought of an elephant.
What?
The thought of an elephant.
Well, we could even say a thought can be way more than an elephant, can it? I mean, I'm stupid, I'm horrible, I'm an awful person. Even depressive thoughts can. So anyway, that was my little puzzle. What weighs more than an elephant and is lighter than a feather? And so then I said here that I think that's the greatest mystery in life. That's our greatest mystery. Your greatest mystery. My greatest mystery. And so, and then intellectually, I can answer that question for you. And some of you, I mean, if I use this thing, I can say what it is. You can say what it is, probably. But that's intellect. So I'm going to tell you what the answer is in a minute, but it's just an intellectual answer. It's not an experience. And it's the experience of what that is that is so extraordinary for each of us and potentially freeing. Something that weighs more than an elephant and is lighter than a feather. So when I say that it's heavier than an elephant, that comes to really Buddhism to me. What is it the Buddha is most concerned with? Suffering. Human suffering. The human condition. So then I think of what this is, I think of what happened in Orlando a couple of weeks ago. Is that not incredibly heavy in our lives? You think about what just happened in England, right? They were fighting, for the past 2 months about the Brexit, leaving England or leaving the European common market or not. So then you start thinking of the heavy part of what we're talking about is experienced everywhere in the world. Is the conflict between all human beings, the Russia and the Ukraine, Israel and Palestine. It's just, look around. It's just this endless conflict, endless disagreement, and. So, as I was saying, that the Buddha, in some ways, was most concerned about this aspect of what is heavier than an elephant and lighter. Not to say that the Buddha was not concerned with the light part of it, but certainly the heavy part, the part of that causes us to suffer. Something causes us to suffer, and something causes us to be dissatisfied with every moment. As I was saying, as we were sitting, we got to, when we had all endured and lasted, right, for 30, 35 minutes, and then I said, so now we got about 5 more minutes. So what are we doing the last 5 minutes? Are we enduring? Oh, God. Right? Hanging on until he rings that damn bell, right? And then we're released and free. And how is it we're released and free right when the bell rings, right? Oh, God, and now my life is better? No. It's a very fascinating thing if you think about it, right? So that 45 minutes is really an experience of reality. What do we do with that experience of reality for 45 minutes? To some extent, it's an experience of every minute's not good enough, right? We're sitting, and not to say that some of you are not, but mostly there's this tendency for that thing that is heavier than an elephant to not find any moment really good enough. Nothing is good enough in this moment. It's the next moment that's going to be better, right? If I can just hold on to now, something nice will happen a little bit later. Maybe you'll sell, you'll get a new renter. Or maybe I'll get a new renter. I just realized a while ago that I have I was kind of stressed out because of Tuesday and Wednesday. I have all these things to do, and all of a sudden I thought, well, I forgot Monday. It's very good because I can do things tomorrow that I didn't realize I could do. Okay, so I'm going to say a little bit more about the heavier, but I'm going to say something about the lighter. The Tibetans say, when they describe it as the lighter than a feather, something's lighter than a feather. The Tibetans call it intelligent space. Now that's not very heavy, is it? Right? How much would intelligent space weigh on the scale? Let's put it down on a scale. So the Tibetans refer to it as intelligent space, which I love. My favorite description of it, and it has been forever since I first read this. It was a movie. It was actually a book. I never forgot it the moment I read it. It's sort of like, it went in my brain. It's called The Unbearable Lightness of Being. The unbearable lightness of being. What is the unbearable lightness of being? That is the other side of what we're talking about. That's the thing that's lighter than a feather, of course. I mean, unbearable lightness of being would, in some ways, describe something that's lighter than a feather. Or, as the Tibetans would say, it's intelligent space. So, I think most of you have a clue. Don't you have a clue what I'm talking about now? I said the word we use to describe, I think I'll read that, this thing that can weigh us down so completely and yet lift us up to the stars. The thing that can be so shrouded in darkness that it causes unbelievable conflict and suffering from Orlando on. And yet it can awaken to the most profound insight that can transform what I am or what you are. Is called the self. It's the self. That is what weighs more than an elephant and is lighter than a feather. It's called the self. So, and so I think, as you all will know, so this is something that Mr. Buddha was extremely focused on. And so he gave it a name other than, let me go back just a minute to go back and say that before he gave it a name, the yogis gave it a name, and the people in Advaita yoga gave it a name. They called it Sat Chit Ananda. Or if you say it fast, it's Satchidananda, but they call it Sat Chit Ananda. Sat is being, which would be that aspect of the unbearable lightness of being. Sat is being, Chit is consciousness, and Ananda is bliss. So they actually describe the self as a Satchidananda, right? Being, consciousness, and bliss. I wouldn't mind the bliss part, would you? I would go for the bliss part, yeah. And that goes to the part that I said, that the way that it can be transformed to the star, or can be weighed down. Most of you know this, probably. So if you come to what the Buddha referred to it, it's very interesting what he called it. So I'm calling it the self. He called it anatta, which means two different things. Some people call it no self, but I think the literal translation of it is not self, right? So here we were talking this thing that what weighs more than an elephant and is lighter than a feather. So he calls it not self. Now that's a very interesting thing, right? It's to refer to it as not self, right? We stumble and we struggle to figure out what the hell is this thing. So, and forever we've tried to define it and describe it. I mean, from the beginning of time, what is it? What is Socrates? Was it Socrates who said, "Know thyself"? Somebody said it. We've been struggling with that forever, and yet, what is it? That we've not done so well with defining it. And the Buddha was so smart. I mean, he was pretty damn smart. Do you agree, Mark? So he wouldn't define it. He said, "Well, so what is the self, sir?" So he said, "It's not self." He wouldn't describe it because he knew, of course, what we'll do with it. Right then, he said, "Oh, right, we'll make a nest out of it. We'll make a nest out of anything." If you describe something to me, my intellect will then define it. And so then we'll, like, you remember when I was talking about the three little pigs? We'll make a straw house out of it, or a wood house out of it, a brick house out of it, right? But we'll make a nest out of it. We'll define it. The mind will say, "I've got that," and we'll actually solidify it. So he was smart enough to know that if you try to put it into words, if you try to solidify and concretize what this is, you will then have destroyed any part. It's not you can't destroy the self. I can't do it, nor can you. But you can sure as hell destroy your ability to discover it. That's the one power every person in this room has, including me. I have the power to block my discovery of it. I can do that. I can't destroy it, of course, right? If you want to destroy intelligent space, let me tell you how you're going to do it, right? Was the stick big enough or light enough to destroy that? But we can block it by reifying it, by trying to define it, by trying to figure out what it is. We can't do that. So if you disabuse yourself of that idea that you can actually figure it out in your head, you're a little bit going in the right direction. It can't be figured out that way. Well, that's kind of bad news, right? You can't figure it out. So, what do we do? Well, so that's going to bring us to Mr. Krishnamurti. Ramana Maharshi said, what you do is that you just inquire. You continually inquire. Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? That was it's called self-inquiry. And Nisargadatta, who is, I think, was more of an extrovert. I think Ramana Maharshi was pretty introverted, and I think that Nisargadatta was perhaps pretty extroverted. So he didn't say, "Who am I?" He said, "Just stay with the feeling of I am. Stick with it. Stay with that feeling. I am, I am, I am." So those are techniques. The one person who despised techniques to the end of time was Krishnamurti. He despised technique. And in this book, it's very interesting. I highly recommend this, by the way. Can Humanity Change? It's a really interesting book, and so I've been thinking about maybe we'll have like a little book review. Maybe we could all get together and read this together. And so it's really well worth our study. So this is where I'm going to read something, I think, if I can find it. One of the things that Krishnamurti, well, it's really interesting. So this is a kind of like a sort of like a seminar. Krishnamurti met with like 5 or 6 really wonderful and brilliant people, one of whom was a wonderful and quite famous Buddhist. And it's very interesting to hear, because all these people, you can see that these people really kind of come from their own perspective, right? And they'll be asking something, and then Krishnamurti's really very polite. He's very kind of, and he said, "No, I don't mean to be disrespectful of the Buddha, but I'm not interested in what the Buddha says. He says, I'm just interested in what you say, right? And then the person will say, and then they'll kind of repeat back, and then he'll say, so there's three of us. There's you, there's me, and there's the Buddha. I'm not interested in that. I'm just interested in just you and me, right? And it's amazing how people can't quite get that, right? They just realize that they're always coming from some perspective that in their head, right, that they've been taught, right? Either Christianity or Buddhism or Zen, but even in the conversation with him, they could not stop but put the overlay of what they had been, however they've been programmed. And so he was very good about that and rather skillful. And he tried his best to be polite, although bless his heart, he got very, very discouraged at the end of his life. I mean, so he'll be in India, so like in a tent with say 3,000 people literally. And so now, and towards the end of his life, people kept saying, well, I've been listening to you now for 40 years and I haven't changed. That would be kind of discouraging, wouldn't you think? So this is kind of like why the book was entitled, Can Humanity Change? So I want to just give you a little flavor of this, and then I'm going to just say a couple of more things. And then I'm going to share with you my favorite, probably. I think this is my favorite sentence. I can't find it, by the way, so it'll be just a paraphrase. But this is something, I think that it is like quite astounding what he said. And it sort of illuminates what we're talking about. So I forgot what we were talking about. Do you remember what we were talking about? So we're talking about what weighs more than an elephant is lighter than a feather. And we're talking about this thing that no one has ever been able to define, and yet it is that which causes us to suffer, and it is that which causes us to go to the stars in terms of transformation. It's a big deal. It's a huge deal. And it's a really big deal, John. I mean, it's kind of, and I'm not quite sure that people are really dealing with it. We get into, I listen to, Dharma talks, and not to criticize anybody, and I really mean that, but we get into so much technique, so there's the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and there's the 7 factors of awakening, and there's the 4 noble truths, and then there's the 6 sense bases, and then there's the 5 aggregates of clinging. It's all so mental, it's all so intellectual, and Christian Murder just hated it. I mean, and so these poor people, they'll bring this stuff up to him, and he just didn't like it because he kept saying, that it's just taking you into your head. It's taking you away from this fundamental question, which may well be, what is this self? What is this? This is like he lived this question, and he said it over and over and over. And poor old thing. So he taught for 40 years. It's very interesting that the Buddha taught for 45 years, isn't it? Both of them taught for, extraordinarily long amount of time. The Buddha, I think, had a little more success than Krishnamurti. But then the Krishnamurti refused to give anybody a technique, didn't he, Robert? I mean, the Buddha gave us tremendous technique, and Krishnamurti wouldn't do it. So I think he was stingy. That wasn't the right thing to say, was it? Okay, so here we go. So I've just kind of underlined a couple of pithy sentences because this is, it's a kind of, it's so wonderful. It's quite brilliant. And so, but I wanted to bottom line this for you all. I'm just going to read a little bit of this, and then I'm just going to tell you exactly. So he said, so he's speaking about identification. This is my bowl. It doesn't belong to you. This is my bowl, right? And as we were talking on Saturday, Lori made the mistake of saying something intelligent to me. So, but I was saying again, even the thing like when we were talking about, I'm sitting in my room and this is my body, right? And I said, Well, you're shot out of the water. I said this literally to her right on set. I said, you're shot out of the water the minute you say, this is my body, right? Who says this is my body, right? I mean, this is the body, right? But we think in terms, I mean, how often do we not think of mine? This is mine. This is my breath. It doesn't belong to you. This is my breath, right? This is my exhalation. Right? Isn't that natural? Right? This is my finger. I am now moving my finger. So this is, according to Krishnamurti, this is identification, right? Identify everything with as mine. This is mine, me and mine. So that's kind of pretty core Buddhism. That's really where the Buddha is getting into this whole thing of trying to help us mindfully separate out from ownership to seeing that, that there's two separate things going on. But anyway, so this is what this guy says. So he says that identification, so he calls identification as the movement of thought. Okay? So he says, can it come to an end? If thought didn't say, this is my furniture, identifying itself with that because it gives pleasure, position, and security, all that, there would be no identification, right? Without saying this is mine, there'd be no identification. So he says, so the root, and this is the sentence that I want to share with you all, the root of the self, which is what we're trying to figure out. We're trying to figure out what is the self. He says the root of the self is the movement of thought. Oh dear. Oh dear. How many people have an experience of the movement of thought? Did you have any thought moving when you were sitting for the past 45 minutes? Did anybody have the thought moving? Mark, you did? Oh, that's very unusual.
Everyone's thoughts were moving. I don't know why anyone doesn't say so.
Like racing thoughts.
What?
Racing thoughts.
Racing thoughts, yes. Yeah, I mean, it really, actually, one thought to another thought is the movement of thought, right? Linking. So he says that the self, right, the root of the self, the root of the self is the movement of thought. Now, this is really kind of core Krishnamurti. And I don't think that you could say, like you could tease that into the Buddha's teachings, right, of anatta, but it's not that clear. And this is why I like Krishnamurti so much, because, like Krishnamurti would really not even get into the whole thing of is it wholesome or is it unwholesome, right? Selecting this thought or that thought, as more as trying to be aware of the fact that it's the thought itself. That's where the self stays alive. The self exists through the movement of thought. That's pretty serious news for those of us who think a lot. So then I'm going to go on to the next little thing right here. Ryan, are you enjoying this? Mm-hmm. You were the one I was thinking about Monday, by the way. I thought, oh, there's Monday. All right, so now I want to share with you all a little bit of this, and then I'm going to end. Is it possible not to the end of one's existence, but in daily life, to live without the process of identification that is the result of thought? You can't identify with something without thinking. This is mine, right? You can't. I mean, you can look at this bowl, Allison, right? We can look at this, but it's only the identification of it that takes ownership of it, right? So it requires a thought to own it, right? I mean, if you look at a tree, outside, you can look at a tree and you don't have to own that tree. You really don't. You can go outside and experience anything that's wonderful. You can look at your motorcycle. You don't have to have the thought, this is mine, right? But the minute there's a thought of it, then you take ownership. Where do you think the odds are the self has arisen in that thought? That's the way it arises, the thought, this is mine. That has created the self. If you look at a tree and you don't take any ownership of it, you just experience it, then there's no self that arises, at least according to Mr. Christian Murray. Anyway, he says, can the movement of thought end, I love this, while I am living? This is the question, rather than what happens when I die. The me is merely a movement of thought. Do you like the way I do this when I move over? So the me, right, is the movement of thought. Can the movement of thought end while I am living? This is the question, rather than what happens when I die. I'm repeating myself. The me is merely a movement of thought. And thought itself, I love this now, so just get this, okay? Thought itself is very limited. It is a small, broken up piece of vast movement. That's exactly right? Just think about it. It's a small, broken up piece of vast movement. How many broken up pieces were there in your last sit for 45 minutes? How many broken up pieces, right, of thought in the vast movement? Those are the little me's, every one of them. How many little me's appeared when we sat for 45 minutes? 900? 1,050? How many broken pieces? They're all little pieces of me that together create a sense of self. So it's pretty smart. Okay, so he says, as long as thought is limited, a broken up thing, a fragment, whatever it creates will also be limited. Broken up and fragmented. So can a human being, or you and I, or any of us, can we live without the movement of thought, which is the essence of the self? So then he goes on, he makes a statement a little bit later, and he talks about a graveyard renunciation, which I'd never heard before. He didn't say that. He says a graveyard renunciation is just when we die, and then then it's gone, right? I love that. I don't remember his saying that before, but that's what he calls the true graveyard renunciation, just when you die. Then it's a little bit late. And he says it's possible to die before a graveyard renunciation. I mean, and of course the news is I would prefer to kind of go for that, wouldn't you? I'd rather, remember the little thing I said, now I lay me down to sleep, I pray the Lord my soul to sleep, if I should wake before I die. Right? If I should wake before I die. That's exactly what he means. When he says a graveyard renunciation it's like, it's too late then, baby, right? I mean, but he says that it is possible to die in this special sense, in the sense of thought, to die before that graveyard renunciation. So what does he mean to die before that happens? He means, and this is the sentence that I've been preserving and saving. I think I said it. I said it to Jane in her magical place in Castle Valley, to which she invited me. He said, thought can only end when it sees itself. Well, it's just an extraordinary statement, So what does that mean? What? Thought can only end when it sees itself. So if thought is simply that, just that continuation of those little fragmented moments, right? Those little moments of identification. But more than that, that little sense of self that keeps rising, that rises on thought. What happens if you are sitting in silence and quiet and you have this mind that has become quite still and quite skilled at just watching without an agenda? And that's the thing that I was saying on Saturday. It's so hard for us to imagine watching without an agenda. I'm watching because, right? Isn't that the way it is? I'm watching because. I'm watching, okay, so I want to be mindful. Well, that's it. You're just screwed. You've just blown yourself out of the water. It has to be this silent witness that does not have a dog in the hunt, as I am inclined to say. It has to be this pure watching. It's exactly what he said. He talks about the listening to someone with total attention, which he calls love, actually. That you just listen with total attention. There's no agenda in it. There's no agenda. You just are silently listening. So when he says that thought only can end when it sees itself, here's the best I can do for you all. I mean, in my own experience. And I've had this experience 4 times in the past 40 years. I made that up. Actually, I've had this experience more frequently than not recently, because I've been doing this a whole lot recently. And I was speaking of this at Tuesday, I think. But this is what he says. How is it? Let me back up. Okay, so if we're talking about like what did he say about the? I can't remember what he said. It's broken up into the vast. How did he say it? Well, okay, doesn't matter. So when we sat for 45 minutes, and I asked you all how many little fragmented thoughts did we have, right? Well, why did they continue going? Let's say you had, how many do you think you had in 45 minutes? How many? Give me a number. 600.
Yeah.
600 is fine, right? Let's say you had 600 little thoughts. Some of them big and some of them little. But you had 600 thoughts in 45 minutes. The truth is, if you, according to science, that's way low. I mean, I think I read like 25,000 thoughts a day, something unbelievable. I think I read 25,000 thoughts a day. They argue about that. It goes from 25 up to 60 thoughts a day. Okay, but Raul was an extremely advanced person, so he only had 600. Okay. Well, what happened there? Why did he have 600 thoughts in 45 minutes? Why didn't they end? And what would happen had they ended? I mean, if the self is writing, if the sense of me, I am, if it needs those 600, if it needs 600 of those things to happen, right? Number one, it's probably not really wild about their breaking up, right? Because if it's invested in protecting itself, which we all are, except me. No, if we're invested in protecting that sense of self because, right, we're terrified of the unbearable lightness of being, Allison, if that's too scary for something inside, right? If it makes something shake, at the idea of almost like non-existence, which is what I love that the unbearable lightness of being does not imply non-existence. Being does not imply non-existence, people. Being does imply existence, as Mr. Jung used to say. Jung said the idea that we don't exist is absurd. He hated that. But anyway, so I'm back to my little thing. I've got to end now. I'm getting bored. So you had 600 of those little boogers. What if you had been invested in really watching, just like hanging on to one of them? Just pick one, and stay with it to the end of it. Do you think that it would end? You got a thought?
I think you'd get tired and you'd end up, eventually you glom onto something else.
Well, okay, so I don't think that's true.
Well,
No, I think that's a good bet.
at one level, that's, in my humble opinion, that's what would happen. But I also see this as a series of concentric circles.
Yeah.
So at one level this is happening, but there is a greater awareness that watches.
Right.
And there is at a point where you can not own that.
Right. The other thing is just, I mean, like Allison had said something about like maybe on Tuesday or one of those Tuesdays, but you were talking about this that you start as you go down, you start seeing a subtext, right? I mean that there's more and they're more and more and more and more rapid the lower you go, which is a different way of saying that. But I guess. For one thing, you know, as we sit, and I think that most of us have that experience. The mind does settle. The mind gets quieter. The mind gets quieter. And in theory, the ability to see, in terms of watching, gets clearer and clearer, brighter and brighter. But the point is, it is possible, according to Krishnamurti, to once mindfulness has awakened, you know, wherever you are in that last sit, suddenly you realize, I mean, everybody's had this. You realize that you are either waiting for the bell, or getting ready to get on your motorcycle, or thinking about your knee hurting, or it doesn't matter what it is. There's a thought that comes. Everybody has one thought. Everybody had a thought, no matter how minor and little they were. Everyone in this room had one thought that you could have stayed with. The truth is, the game is not to stay with it. That's the game. That's the trick. I watch my mind do it constantly. You know, here comes a thought. Waking. I mean, I go right on as if that's getting rid of it. It's not getting rid of it at all, right? But the game is to leap to the next thought, to the next thought, to the next thought. So the point is, and this is what Krishnamurti says, that's what he means by thought seeing its own activity. If there is this ability to sit and to the end of a thought, to watch it, what you'll see is that it's almost like you experience, that is the unbearable lightness of being. It's just a thought. It's nothing. It's like a cloud. And and at the end of that, there is a space of freedom, of silence. So if you go back to that first question of what weighs more than an elephant is lighter than a feather, it is that ineffable thing that exists through the movement of thought. What would it be like when the thought ends? My statement is that that's what we have to find. That's what this is all about. Having the courage to sit with that, and the ability to sit and watch that thought.